had an executive session to discuss potential litigation, and at 6 p.m. we had a meeting to discuss conduct business and economic development partnership interviews. Can we please all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Brian Bennett.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Lucy Krakowiak. Here. Council members Jack Block Jr.
Here.
Bob Ecker.
Here.
Joan McGilton. Here. Gerald F. Robinson.
Here.
I would like to note that Rose Clark is excused this evening. Next up, we have agenda confirmation. Can we please get a motion?
I move agenda confirmation.
Okay, I would like to propose that we remove the Burien City Council meeting guidelines from the consent agenda and put that on the business agenda. So I'd like to discuss Councilmember Edgar's proposal and whether we should have that here or there. So we need 3 votes to remove that from the consent agenda. So, yep. Anyone else willing to remove that from the consent agenda? Yeah. Okay, so we'll move that to the end of the business agenda.
So I
And
change my motion for agenda confirmation?
I think just the motion as amended. Can we please go ahead and register our
Give
votes?
me a second.
Do we have a second for the motion? Okay, can we go ahead and register our votes? The agenda is confirmed 5-1. No. So we have a few special items to add this evening. If Mr. Martin would like to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have a couple of, or several items that are not on the agenda. Just take a minute and we want to get them in first. First, I'd like to inform council of what you already know, and that is that formerly our senior planner, Chip Davis, has been appointed to replace Scott Greenberg, who is our planning director. Scott left the city in October and went to Mercer Island. We did a competitive search to refill his position. Had a very strong candidate pool, probably one of the strongest I've seen for these kinds of positions in several years. Chip, not surprisingly, emerged on top, and so I made the appointment last week. Chip is here before you tonight, and I wanted to just formally acknowledge that this had taken place and see if Chip had anything he'd like to say. We've already made the joke about having big shoes to fill from Scott Greenberg, but clearly that's not the case. It might be the other way around in this instance.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to start off by thanking Mike and the other members of the review panel for their huge vote of confidence in selecting me as Community Development Director's position. I'd also like to thank all my teammates for their invaluable support and encouragement during the last 6 months. Not to diminish the challenges that we face right now, I am very much energized by what I see in our immediate future. The last 3 pre-application meetings that we've conducted and the next 2 meetings that we have scheduled have been booked solid with development proposals. The pre-application meetings, as I told you at the retreat, are usually, they serve as an indicator for future development proposals. And we have not seen this level of development activity for over 3 years. We currently have 3 major public projects, one of which you'll be receiving a briefing on shortly, which will have lasting positive effects for Burien residents. Once again, I'd just like to thank you, and on behalf of the community development team, we look forward to appearing before you frequently for planning and building and zoning issues in the future. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mr. Davis. One thing I would like to note, I was going to save this for council reports, but since you're here with us, I'll share it now. Councilmember Robinson, Councilmember Clark, and I went to the opening of a Fijian Hindu temple in Boulevard Park last weekend. It was a wonderful ceremony. A lot of people there, great facility, and they were incredibly appreciative, both the members of the temple and there were also the architects and engineers there, of Burien City staff and how helpful they were to work with, especially after having been part of the county, and they had become very frustrated and almost given up on the project, and they were especially appreciative of your work and mentioned you by name. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I was going to mention that later, but I'll mention it to you now since we've got you here on the hot seat. Any further comments or questions for Mr. Davis?
Just congratulations, we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
And council's aware that this particular position serves on the leadership team, which helps me kind of run the organization, make some of the decisions. So,
I'd like to add
Thanks, Chief.
to what the mayor said. At that particular event, a couple of people approached me about the fact that it was so much easier to work with the city of Burien than it had been to work with King County. They had spent years on that project, and once you got annexed into Burien, it was the happiest thing that happened to them.
Thanks, Jim. Now, Mr. Mayor, also not on your agenda, but an important presentation. Tonight we have David Johnson, who's the CEO of Navos, who's come before us to tell you about a major project that he is working on, and that I predict will become something that the city is identified with in the not-too-distant future. Very appreciative that David was able to make the time to come and tell us in person about this. But when he came into my office and told me about it a couple of months ago, I realized I wouldn't be able to do justice in telling you what this project was about, so I asked him to come and do it in person when it was finally made public. So with that.
Sorry, I didn't realize that was the introduction.
Oh,
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And Monica promised me I could not mess this up. So thank you so much. I spoke before you a few years back as we were building our mental health and wellness center. And you were tremendously warm and supportive to us, and that project has turned out to be getting national attention. So thank you so much for your help on that. I'm wanting to tell you what we're doing with the Ruth Dykeman campus. It's a wonderful story of three legacy organizations coming together. The Ruth Dykeman Children's Center has been serving children for 90 years, and another organization in the area, Seattle Children's Home, has been serving children for 128 years. The oldest charity in our county and the oldest children's charity in the state of Washington. Both of these smaller organizations provided services that have become, for good reason, less desirable. We want to have children spending time with their families as much as possible and in institutions as little as possible. So these organizations served a need for many decades, but we're wanting to move toward children having shorter stays and more work being done in the home. They both approached Navos. We didn't approach them, and they wanted to become part of the larger ship as we go into this era of healthcare reform. Navos is one of the largest mental health centers in the nation. We're now a $54 million organization with 600 employees. And we decided to come together and we would do so with the idea, and this was a hard proposal to make to the people who were the board of directors of Seattle Children's Home, that in coming together we would sell their property on Queen Anne and we would invest every penny into developing the Ruth Dykeman campus. It is no secret to you why I made that decision. I absolutely understand that Burien is one of the best places, I think, in the nation to do business. And the city council, the city manager, and the city staff have been tremendous to Navos through the years. Doing business here is a joy, and the citizens of Burien have been warm and kind to us. We wanted to bring construction dollars to this city. We wanted to bring family wage jobs to this city. We wanted to grow what we do in this city. So by coming together, we could find efficiencies and we could put together a broad spectrum of services. We're calling it a center of excellence, and that's actually a term in the healthcare field today. Not everything that every organization, and even not every organization, can have a center of excellence. But we wanted to put together a center of excellence for services for children and families. And through both doing inpatient residential services and also having the campus be a home base for outpatient services, we can be serving children as young as 5 weeks old who are coming up before the dependency court and with our intervention can stay with their families all the way through young adults who are 25 years old, people 18 to 25 who are coming out of the foster care system. When many of our children turn 18, they go off to the prolonged adolescence of college. Children who have been in foster care are told at the age, on the day they turn 18, they're all grown up now. And that's not true. They're tremendously vulnerable. And so we are creating a transitional living program for 18 to 25-year-olds that will be on the campus as well. In any given year, 1 in 5 children has a condition that could be diagnosed and could benefit from mental health treatment. NAVOS and our consortium of 18 subcontracting organizations, everywhere from Auburn Youth Resources and Renton area Youth Services through the Refugee Women's Alliance of King County. We serve over half of the children who are seen in the public mental health system. So we are everywhere all throughout the county serving children. And so we're in about 50 schools now in South and West King County. And so our vision is to put together this center of excellence, and we wanted to do it on that amazing piece of land that's like a sanctuary. If you've ever been to the Ruth Dykeman campus, you come over that rise and you drive down into this wonderfully teary-filled oasis or sanctuary. And that's exactly the feeling we want to have. When children come to us, either for residential care or for outpatient services with their family, we want them to have the experience of going into a grove, into an oasis, into a very safe and secure place. We chose as our architect and planners for this project Bethune Architects, and the reason we did so is they were the architects that designed Islandwood on Bainbridge Island. Go home and Google it if you don't know what it is. It's a beautiful nature reserve, a learning community where children all throughout the state of Washington can go and learn about nature. And they were as inspired by this campus as we are. And in the planning that we've done since then, we keep talking about the trees and the hills and the outside, and we have to keep making ourselves go back into the buildings to design the interior of the buildings that we're working on. But the ideas that we talked about were neighborhood and community and wellness and recovery and resiliency. One of the first projects that we'll be doing is the construction of what we call Independence Bridge. And this is a residential transitional living program for people 18 to 25. And it's called a bridge because it truly is a bridge from childhood and adolescence, and often very difficult and traumatized adolescence, into a communal living. And we have secured all the money we need to construct this project, both from the state of Washington and from King County. Here's the artist's rendering of the inside of one of the units. So each young adult will have their own small studio apartment with a little kitchen area and area for their own belongings. But also, and I love the bicycle on the wall, also there will be communal areas too, much like a college dormitory. So there will be a communal living room area and a kitchen where young people can spend time together. And so we've got the money, we've got the architects, we're moving ahead, and again, the city of Burien has been so wonderful in helping us quickly move along with this project. One of the desires of the state of Washington was to create jobs with the money they gave us for this, and that's when we want to be in construction by end of June. We will, for our total project, with the redesign of all the structures on the property, we're going to be putting additional parking on the site. We've done, part of what I love about working with this team is they have an arborist who's there to help save trees and protect trees and make trees healthy that aren't healthy or plant new trees. So we have a very extensive plan about what we're going to do to preserve the field in a park-like setting. And we're also, this is about jobs, this is about health and wellness and so on. So we'll start at the end of June in construction of that one building that'll be facing 10th. And then we will be working on other parts of the campus and hope by February of 2015 to have completed our project. As is typical of NAVOS, we start before we have all the money, and we found with the Mental Health and Wellness Center, even in the midst of the Great Recession, that worked out and we were able to finish the project in time. This is a picture of Islandwood. And you can see as you look at this, this is the look and feel that we want to preserve for the campus, the Ruth Dykeman campus. here we all are planning. We've had, I think there have been 110 focus groups with children, with staff, with parents, with other people in the public service system, trying to make sure that we design the very best product. This is our children's services staff, trying to figure out how best to use that property and what facilities we would most want to have. And we looked very carefully at whether somebody's coming in for residential treatment or for an outpatient counseling appointment. What is it like when they first enter? What kind of greeting do they get? What waiting space do they need? What kind of views do they need to have out the windows? It's such a delight to work with this particular campus. It just affords such capacity for beauty. I love this rendering done by a group of children who currently live in a residential treatment program. They do put on here that they would like a dirt bike racing track, which we are not going to include. They also did say that they wanted to have better cars in the staff parking lot. So, but again, we continue to walk every inch of the land with our planning team to figure out how best to fit in with the sanctuary feeling of the campus. We looked at all sorts of different aspects. We looked at where the sun comes, where the wind blows. We looked at current buildings. We looked at the trees, this beautiful grove of madronas that, of course, needs to be honored and preserved. We looked at the trees that are there, the trees that are healthy, the trees that need to be replaced. We have a 25-year plan where we could be planting some things now that could be strong and big before other things that are less healthy need to come down. We looked at where all the utilities are that cross the campus. We looked at the buffers that need to be in place around those various pieces. We looked at where the stream flows through. We looked at whether we wanted to expose more of the stream. How could we be careful stewards of that? One of the exciting things about this property is that we get to make it a teaching campus where children can see how careful we're being of nature and of the ecosystem. That's also a way of letting them know we're going to be very safe with them. We ended up very interested in that piece of land that's closest to the water. And we came up with a master view of the campus where that sanctuary, the closest to the water, would be an open space, protected space, and that we would cluster buildings around that so the view can be had from where children are living, where children are receiving outpatient counseling services. We will eventually, these are the buildings we'll have on the property. We will have a school because some of the children will be going to school right on that site. We'll have studios, little separate cabins that are an art studio, a music studio, maybe a dance studio. We'll have a very small modified gym. We're going to be creating some residential cottages that have a look and a feel of a very natural family home. We have what we call the lodge, which is where we'll have some other group rooms, activity rooms. We look at this as a place where other community services that serve children might want to use some of the space as well. Over to your far right, you'll see IB, that's the Independence Bridge Transitional Living Program. We will have a very small health center, the way we have an integrated primary health care center at our Mental Health and Wellness Center on 136th and Anvil. But we won't get there right away. And so this shows how we will build some new buildings in the beginning and also continue to use some of the previous buildings until we have money to replace them. So there's stuff we have to do with public planners, and again, just so delighted to get to work with the amazing team of folks here in Burien. I will go out wherever you want me to go and tell them why this is the place to be, because I so firmly believe in it. So I think that's all the time I have, but I wanted to offer opportunity to answer questions if you wish.
Any questions or comments? Councilmember Block.
Mr. Mayor, well, I'm really excited about the bridge house. That's a really neat, I think it's unfortunate that once kids turn 18, they leave the foster system and they're dumped out in the world. We've all benefited from having parents, to assist in that transition. So, well, I should say most of us have benefited. Yeah. But how many units of transitional housing?
I believe there will be 24 there, and probably a manager living on site as well.
Okay, and then will the young people there be charged rent or sliding scale or?
Yes, because this is basically a subsidized, publicly subsidized program, there will be maybe a third of their income will go toward living expenses. And so that's why it's good to be able to build something that doesn't have a mortgage and has some ongoing supports to subsidize rents.
And is there going to be a time limit on how long?
You know, I certainly the distance between 18 and 25, my thought is probably 2 or 3 years. And different people will travel at different rates, much as adolescents do and other families as well. Part of what we love about that site is that their front view will be 10th Avenue. They will be near the beautiful transit station here in town. They'll be able to be going to school, maybe having jobs. But in their backyard is the support of a full support service organization to keep them going.
And is there a basement, so when they're 28, 29, back
Well, I was told that you would let them live with you, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Councilmember McGill.
Methuen is absolutely brilliant. You couldn't have picked a more sustainable architectural firm to work with than Islandwood is. Their shining example of the work that they do. But I was wondering if you were aware of the Environmental Science Center in Burien that puts on programs for kids. They have a small facility down at the beach in Seahurst Park. I think that might be a good addition when you have the kids there to do some of that field exploration that you're building into your program. So I'd be glad to put you in contact with the folks down there.
Thank you. I'd love to do that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Methuen speaks just as highly of Burien as you speak with it, by the way. It's true.
Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dave. And council may be interested to know that Stephanie Jewett, one of our planners, is assigned to this project, so she's kind of the person in charge of all aspects of this in addition to her other duties, so she's very excited to be working with Dave on this. Finally, tonight, in the spirit of things that are not on your agenda, is Jessica Huggins? Oh, thank you. I've never met you. Hi. As you approach the podium, Jessica is with Cascadia Research.
Yes.
And they've been involved in our whale on the beach, and she's going to give us kind of an update of where that's at.
Yeah, I was asked to kind of give you guys a briefing on what happened on Saturday and kind of where we're going from here. I work for Cascadia Research. We're a small nonprofit marine mammal research organization in Olympia. We are part of the Marine Mammal Stranding Network, and our stranding activities are overseen by NOAA Fisheries in Seattle. We started receiving calls around 8:30, 9 o'clock of a whale washing in around the 3 Point area, and by about 10:30 it was stuck at Seahurst Park. We and members of the other members of the Stranding Network, including the Math Center from Redondo, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and some other organizations around the Sound all came, and we initially examined the whale. We didn't do an extensive exam because given the position, we didn't feel that everyone would want us to cut it all open and leave everything laying out there. We did positively identify it as a fin whale. They are usually an offshore species. They're about 50 miles offshore most of the time. They are an endangered species, largely because we just don't know how many there are now. They were heavily hunted during commercial whaling, and while their population is recovering, it's very difficult to know how many there are because they're not easily identifiable as individuals. So we do a lot of photo ID work with whales like humpback whales and gray whales and blue whales, and we can do individual identifications with those animals, but fin whales are a lot more difficult to do that with, so we just don't know how many they are. They are very susceptible to ship strikes. They do spend a lot of time in surface feeding, and this is the 10th fin whale we've had in Washington since 2002. 8 of them have been inside inland waters, and all 8 of those have been struck by ships. They do, that includes this particular whale, they do lend themselves to being wrapped around the bows of ships because they're very long and slender, and they don't really bounce off like some of the more rotund whales. So they do get brought in more frequently than other whales do. This particular whale, we find evidence of ship strike from bruising in the blubber. It appears that it was probably struck on the right side, that it rolled and got pinned along the back on the bow and was probably dragged a considerable distance. The carcass is partial, so you could have had about 70 feet of whale on your beach, but instead you only have about 52 feet. But we think a lot of that was due to the pressure of the water and the pressure of the impact on the whale. Currently, we don't have plans to do a full extensive necropsy. NOAA Fisheries has been working with the local parks department to find a way to remove the whale from their beach, which, as you can imagine, is not a very easy task. But I think plans are in the works to tow it away. We'll probably tow it to a secure location and let it decompose naturally, because sinking is a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive. So currently that's where we stand. It may be on the beach for a couple more days while we work out logistical details. But we do have information on our website about fin whales and ship strikes and strandings and all of that stuff. It's cascadiaresearch.org if anybody wants to take a look.
Thanks very much, Jessica. Appreciate you coming and staying with us.
Thank you very much for the presentation and your work. We have, I think, one comment or question raised. Councilmember Gilman.
I've been reading on the blogs that the stranding program is in jeopardy in the Washington state budget. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the stranding program is actually funded federally by the Johnny
Federal.
Prescott grant, and that grant was not included in the president's 2014 budget. And it appears that it has been cut from the NOAA budget as well, although they do have some ability to move some funds around. So there may be either no funding or limited funding. We're still waiting to hear that. And that will affect our work on not only large whales, but also, small things like harbor seals and we have a lot of marine life around here, and it's difficult to do this work and to do, especially with disease work and other things with the smaller animals without the support of the federal funds, because they do help with a lot of good programs. So while we do have some volunteers, obviously it can't all be done by volunteers. You need special training for quite a bit of this stuff, and money for lab fees and towing of large whales and all of that other stuff. So please write to the Congress, tell them that you want the Prescott grant to be funded so we can continue all this work. And that would be a nationwide cut, so we would have problems on the East Coast as well and in the South, so all across the states.
So as ship traffic increases and boat traffic in general increases, all you can plan for are more strandings with no budget.
Yes.
Okay. There's been some conversation about how the skeleton of what skull primarily and baleen could be accommodated into marine education programs. Have you had conversations about that?
That is something that everybody wants to see, is, these things to be used for education and outreach, and as well as scientific exploration and things. And I know that NOAA Fisheries has been trying to check with local organizations, trying to render down the skull of a 60-foot whale is a big undertaking, and there aren't a lot of places that are equipped to do that or have the funding to do that. It appears that the National Marine Mammal Laboratory may be interested in taking the skull. The Mass Center may be interested. And so we're working on making sure, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't really want to sink it. It is more expensive, but also then you lose that specimen, which is something we don't have a lot of, and especially because the ship strike happened a little lower on the body, the skull is still intact, which also doesn't always happen. So there is an effort to maintain that so that it is available to the public.
I'm hoping that you'll consider the two marine education entities that are down there, both the high school program with the Marine Tech Center and the Environmental Science Center. If we could get even the baleen, that would be something to put together with a good photo representation of everything that happened. It just has such educational value.
Right.
That once it gets towed away, it'll be out of sight, out of mind. But I think this is a great opportunity to really invest in education, not only for kids, but for adults too, what we have in Puget Sound.
Yes, and in order to have those parks, you do need to have special permits from the federal government. So you have to contact NOAA Fisheries and go through the proper channels. But I do know that some of the baleen was no longer intact, but there are a few plates that are available that could certainly be safe for educational purposes.
Well, it's something I'm personally interested in, so I will contact you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good, thank you again. Councilor Block, did you have?
Oh, yes, got one more question?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Yes.
You know, Cedars Park is a marine sanctuary, and with that, you know, sometimes things happen that are part of nature that are not very pleasant, such as whale coming to ground. But under the natural process, if humans weren't there, that whale would decompose, and the whale's remains would provide nutrients.
Eagles and crabs and.
Yeah. So if that option were to be taken, how long would it take, do you estimate, for the whale to decompose?
Well, it depends on the weather. Obviously, cold weather makes that process a lot slower, but it could be several months. And our plan is to tow it somewhere where it would be along the shoreline, and so it would still be serving that purpose. It would just be in an area that's close to the public, so the skeleton would remain protected. So we still want to facilitate that whole process because that is, you know, how nature works. So, but yes, it could be several months, and it is very, very smelly.
Well,
So the neighbors probably wouldn't like it so much, especially in the heat of the summer. So.
the other option is to tow it down to Tacoma. And where the ship that's struck, where the ship that's struck it probably.
Yes, yeah, unfortunately, we haven't been telling who might have done that. And, you know, a boat that large can hit a whale and not even know that they've got a craft on their bow. And so we know that it's not intentional, you know, like running around trying to hit these guys. It's just wrong place, wrong time. Unfortunate. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again. I will note that my daughters and I made it down there around 10:30 on Saturday, and they remarked on the smell already.
Oh, that wasn't even bad on Saturday.
If you're on the north side, that's where we go. So we walked around. It was amazing to look at. Okay, so that I think wraps up our public comment items. I would like to add one more item. We have a Lars Harold, if I pronounced that right, from Troop 375, who is here for his citizenship in the community badge. Say a few words, you're certainly welcome to if you'd like to go up, or you don't have to, if you don't want to. Wise choice. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to public comment. We have a number of individuals signed up this evening. I'll try to read three in order so you can assemble. First up, we have Dick West, followed by Roger DeWarm, followed by Pamela State.
Hello, my name is Dick West, 11006 Roseburg Avenue South, Burien, Washington, 98168. Washington state law requires that the city to submit a quarterly report of status to the city council. To date, not one of these has been submitted. These reports give a snapshot of how the city is doing in regards to its budget assumptions. The finance department would be responsible for giving the city council these quarterly reports on shortfalls and surplus of revenue and expenditures and why they're occurring. These quarterly report of status provide a high level of transparency to the city's financial dealings. Information that the council is not comfortable with the public knowing, such as how much the White Center annexation costs, would be readily available to everyone. I believe this would lead to a more thoughtful use of our public funds. Budgets are a basis of sound planning. With planning, we can reach our stated goals with certainty. The new quarter has just started, and today, Burien's job is to start preparing the data for their upcoming presentation for the City Council as required by law. Additionally, I'd like to ask that the City Council take a look at the Mercer Island website, specifically their quarterly reports of status, and seeing how that kind of information can be used to more effectively. That's all I have to say about that. However, I would like to say a special thank you to the city manager. I was noting in the packet this evening that there's a response to my various things that I had asked about. And first of all, the city is correct that they have not received the confirmation of the bankruptcy. You will receive an email in the morning with the judge's signature on that. And then starting at the last section, I'd ask if the city manager would elaborate a little bit more on this. Specifically, was talking about that they would require a more proactive approach using a 50 to 100 house scenario with 40 hours. What I would ask is a little bit more information on what additional funding the compliance officer would require and how much general cost that would be. Specifically, 50 houses would add $1 billion to the net worth of the community. It would add $1.7 million to the city's coffers. On paragraph 2 of page 5, we're all trying to negotiate and figure out, how much this is really costing us. And I would be really interested in hearing what the city has to say, as far as an estimate on that. And so, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mayor, we did look at that, and we'll talk about that later in the meeting. In short, we found that a lot of the estimates that Mr. West made were wildly inaccurate, but we'd be glad to elaborate on that later in the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dolan?
My name is Roger DeLorme. I live at 13254 2nd Avenue Southwest. This has to do with the new CARES contract. The city manager is now proposing giving an extended contract to CARES. This extended contract is to include extending the contract for CARES from 2014 to 2016. With no explanation of what new services CARES will cover and what animals they will provide services to. An increase in the amount to be paid to CARES from $120,000 to $170,000 per year to CARES. With no explanation of what this increase will cover. It can be paid in advance to them and in lump sums to remedy their problems as noted in the McVicker evaluation. There will be no competitive bids allowed on this new modified extended contract to be extended another 2 years. CARES employees who are not employees of the city will be given up to a 3% salary annual cost of living adjustment equal to that given to the city staff. Will this be included in the $50,000 increase, or will the city be paying this as an additional fee? Wouldn't we all like this kind of a deal without having to provide an explanation of what we are going to do for the extra $50,000? There was no explanation given explaining the strange numbers shown about the number of service calls for Burien versus King County as was promised at the last council meeting. This explanation was promised by the city staff but is not included for the public to examine. There will be no presentation allowed by King County Animal Control to see what services Burien can purchase from them for $170,000 per year. So where is the transparent and open government at work that the city manager keeps stating is at work in Burien? Why no other competitive bids are being allowed? Why no explanation on the weird numbers the staff showed for Burien at the last meeting? Why just extending a contract to your buddies and treating them as city employees when they are supposed to be outside non-profit contractors? Where is that competitive process that is supposed to be in operation? Would we be doing this for the waste management contract provider or any other contractor? We seem to be spending a lot of money and we don't have any. We've had construction projects way over. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on annexation and how much has already been spent on wards, and we don't have any money. Okay.
Ms. Haley.
My name is Pamela Staley. My address is 11812 4th Avenue Southwest, Burien 98146. Basically, verbatim what he just said, And number two, I'm just trying to figure out how we can come up with $50,000, and yet some people in the council would rather have a police officer, which costs $80,000. We can't come up with $80,000, but we can come up with $50,000 extra per year, plus a 3% increase for living rate. Again, Burien does not have the money for that. We are way overdrawn as it is. There are other options. And again, why are we not allowing other rescues, other agencies such as King County Animal Control come in and give some type of presentation? Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Jack Niskern, followed by J.G. Conley, followed by Katie Meltz.
My name is Jack Niskern. My address is 22602 13th Avenue South in Des Moines. I'm a retired architect who has lived in Des Moines since 1954. I've been intending to come to this meeting, one of your council meetings, for some time. One of my privileges has been to design 3 libraries for King County, and I'm tremendously impressed with the cooperation and coordination that resulted in this being in conjunction with the city and the library. Having said that, I have no specific reason for coming tonight. I'd like to point out that I'm quite old, and I really appreciate the addressment of the previous indications about the Dyckman Center, and would like to also mention that Professor Methune was one of my favorite professors at the University of Washington when I graduated from 1952. I went on to graduate from MIT in the next year, and I had no way of telling you all the things I'd like to tell you in 3 minutes. But the main thing I'd like to move on to is I have been a community activist in Des Moines for the whole time that I've been there. And one of the most significant relationships has been within the Rotary Club of Des Moines. And I am currently most impressed in a Rotary movement by the president of Rotary International, who happens to be Japanese. And he has declared his year a theme of peace. And I think I was in high school when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and I lived through all of the confrontation. I served in the military, but didn't, for strange circumstances. I got, it's tremendously difficult to understand the economics of education, but I went to school in the military and got paid to go to school after I graduated. And so that seems, we've lost our priorities in education. I think that is something else we really need to focus on. I have many more things to say, but I've been very impressed with what I've heard so far here. And one of my big interests also has been in Des Moines is what I call community betterment teamwork. And that is something that has been exemplified here within Burien. My interests have focused a lot on community betterment teamwork between Kent and Des Moines. And I'm also a member of the Kent-Yangzhou Sister City Committee, and find it more difficult to make good relationships with Kent than it is with Yangzhou across the ocean. So I think that's something we should work on. I have designed a number of buildings in Burien, and my architectural career was not focused on great architecture, but I had a lot of good relationships, and one of the buildings that you would be familiar with was Dick's Camera. And Dick was a very good friend who was a Rotarian, and so that's probably a good place to close this part of my remarks, but I'd like to make further contact with the members of the council.
Thank you very much. Ms. Collins.
So I'm JJ Conley, I live at 1619 South 124th Street in Boulevard Park. I'm here once again talking about graffiti. This particular email was sent on March 7th. All the residents and the code enforcement have cleaned up all of theirs, but not one tag from our public works that our public works department is reliable for has been tagged or has been cleaned up. And it's been 26 business days. And I just don't understand how we have laws in effect to get graffiti removed. We have residents that are getting their graffiti off their fences that are, 6 feet high, 20 feet long, and we can't come and get, 10 tags off of the street. It just makes no sense to me. And I just hope that somebody comes along and asks Public Works to, every day take, maybe a half an hour to get this done. Because the thing is I want to move on, but I can't keep on giving you streets and tags when I have this one to take care of first. Because then they say that I overwhelm them, so, I can't move on. 26 days. And I just don't understand. So I hope that our Public Works can get it taken care of. And it seems like the only time it ever does get taken care of is when I stand up here at the pulpit. This will get taken care of, then I'll send another one out, and it'll be another 26 days. And I just hope that we can come to, we have these wonderful people, businesses wanting to come to our area, but they don't want to come to our area when it's all tagged up. I've gotten 509, they're really good at cleaning that up. The wall's been cleaned on 176 down there. Cloverdale's been clean, because they're on top of it. The Port of Seattle, when you come off of Des Moines Memorial Drive, they haven't got tagged in months because they cleaned it up, it got tagged, and they stayed on top of it. We have to do this so that these little punks don't keep on destroying our city. And then these businesses aren't going to want to come in because they're going to come off the freeway and they're going to see all these tags and say, what kind of people live here and why isn't our city taken care of? Their personal property. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mounts?
Hi, my name is Katie Mounts. I live at 439 Southwest 156th Street in Burien. Sorry for my voice. I have called CARES quite a few times. This is in regards to CARES. We have several neighbors with dogs, which are okay. I like creatures, but they refuse to put them on their leashes. And we've had one of our neighbors had his dog on a leash, and a neighbor had a dog that was not socialized off a leash that attacked that dog and injured him extensively. I wrote emails, and it seems to be the only way I could get through is to write an email. Phone calls don't work, you don't get anybody. And so I'm trying to figure out what they do, what actually do they do, because it's very frustrating for me as an animal owner, myself, everybody in our area. In my building, all cooperates, but they don't even pick up their own dog do. They just turn them loose. And there's dog do everywhere unless we clean it up, and I don't even own a dog. But that's gotta stop. So who's gonna help? If, it has to be taken care of. Very frustrating. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have a discussion of CARES, one of our first business agenda items. We'll address some of your questions. Next up, we have Debbie Wagner, followed by Marianne Hudson, followed by Chris Miska.
Hi, I'm Debbie Wagner, and I live at 1520 Southwest 158th in Burien. I feel like we've been deceived. We feel like that at the very beginning, there were people that knew that the contract with CARES would probably cost a lot more than what it did. And I don't think it took Ms. McVickers coming out and saying these things need to be fixed because many of the things that she cited had already been cited by the health department and other people who had visited the facility. Just noticing Presswood cages and what the longevity of that kind of thing might be to repel water or stay clean, and it didn't seem practical. I feel like we've been told and sold a bill of goods about the quality of service and care that would be provided, that it would be much better than King County. I don't think that's ever been the case. I think that we have been told that CARES would take all animals, and now we find out that they don't take in a lot of cats, and I feel that when it's status at a meeting where somebody in charge here told people that it was head above shoulders better than anything that they'd ever seen done before. They knew at that time that it was closed by the King County Health Department. I feel that they have been allowed to falsify records on animals and calls. There have been reports of missing animals in paperwork that people have been concerned about, that the calls are several times inflated over what is even reasonable, where Kent with 118,000 people gets 600 calls in a year, and we've got thousands with a third of the population. It just doesn't make any sense. I think that the calls aren't being logged properly, as Ms. McVickers pointed out. You allowed them to fire their only trained animal control officer over personality conflicts. You allowed them to fire 2 other people that were the only people on staff that had animal experience. You allow them to hire their friends who have no training and experience in animal control. And I think now we've been being lied to about what King County's costs would be to us, because it's based on a lot of criteria that's averaged out over a number of people in the service area, over the number of calls in the service area, and a number of the cities in the service area, 500 that we would fall into. City of SeaTac is paying $107,000 a year for 24/7, 365 days a year animal control and sheltering services. So I think that we need to get the truth, and I think we need to back off of doing anything more with CARES. I think we need to go back to King County, and I think the city needs to stop covering up their mistake.
Thank you. Ms. Hudson.
My name is Marianne Hudson. I live at 110 Southwest 116th Street. Zip code's 98146. I would also like to speak to the proposal to extend the contract for CARES from the year 2014 to 2016. In 2008, King County Animal Control reported 572 phone calls for animal control services, for the city of Burien. That's before Burien broke off and went to CARES, so 572 phone calls. The population of Burien at that time was 33,197. So how can it be that with a current population in Burien of 48,073 people, CARES received 2,860 phone calls? That's 5 times as many phone calls as in 2008, with only a 29% increase in the population. So to keep it really short, I'm asking that Regional Animal Services of King County be invited to a council meeting to share what services they could provide to the city of Burien for the $170,000 that's being proposed.
Thank you. Good space, guys.
Go often. Det är trevligt att vara här igen. Jag heter Good Space Guy och jag bor i Boulevard Park. I was surprised to hear about the what appears to be the terrorist bombing in Boston today. at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Apparently it was bombed. And Boston is a seaport, and the greater Seattle area is also a seaport. And the greater Seattle area and the greater Boston area are connected. We're connected by Highway 90. The way you can find Boston is to just get on Highway 90 and go east, and you'll get to Boston. So we're connected by Highway 90. And if terrorist bombings occur in Boston, then will terrorist bombings occur in Seattle? I'm aware of one prominent terrorist activity by one individual in Seattle in which a Jewish center was attacked. And so a bombing here, a bombing there will, the greater Seattle area also experience a bombing. So just something to think about, something to, it's hard, when a terrorist attacks you, it's really hard to protect yourself. But on protecting ourselves here in Burien, there's another subject, and that is the unemployment. Surprise to surprise, the unemployment continues in Burien. How could that possibly be? I'm an amateur economist, so I read in economics. If I want to make cars go better, then I should read in automotive mechanics and electronics. And thus I'll gain knowledge on how to make cars go better. But if I want to know how our economy can function better, then I should read economics. So if you want a better economy in Burien and indeed the state of Washington, then the subject matter to study is economics. And economics tells us that when you have a minimum wage, what the minimum wage does is to decrease jobs. The minimum wage makes jobs go away. And I heard a prominent professional economist, Milton Friedman, and he said the main thing that the minimum wage does is make jobs go away. And so in Burien, the economic development of Burien is kept down by the state minimum wage, which is a state law. Well, what should the people do? The people of Burien should speak against the minimum wage law, so jobs can come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up we have Quentin Thompson, which brings us to the end of our list. So if anyone else would like to comment this evening, please go ahead and send one to the podium.
Good evening, council, and good evening, audience. I'm going to speak to you about CARES this evening for the animals. Back in 2011, animal control was dispatched by the King County Sheriff's Office. I did some research on my computer and on different things, and the sheriff who we had at the time wanted to get it out of our dispatch center. The number 296 pets was transferred over to CARES, and that is a recorded line. I've checked that for myself. They handle a lot of animals through that number. So if there's another number that CARES has, maybe the public is not aware of it. But when King County Dispatch Center decided to take it out per the sheriff, it went over to CARES, and it's not animal control's responsibility anymore. The reason why it went over to CARES is because they found out it was going to be more cost effective to have CARES do all their dispatching and all their, getting the animal control officers. However, with Deputy Mayor Rose Clark, when she was the mayor, she worked with CARES very hard, along with Councilmember McGilton. I haven't been over to CARES yet, but I am planning to go within the next couple of months. And I heard it was a great program, and for some reason, that number that I just discussed, if it's not working, the people do need to try it again, because it is the new CARES number, as far as I can tell. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our public comment this evening. Next item on our agenda is correspondence for the record. We have a handful of emails and letters that are available for viewing in the packet, also available online. Next up, we have the consent agenda as revised. Can we get a motion, please?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
All those in favor of the, all please register your votes. Agenda is approved unanimously. Next up, we have the business agenda. First item is a presentation of annual report by the Business and Economic Development Partnership.
Good evening, City Council members. This won't be as nice as Mello's, so sorry ahead of time. My name is Carmen Forrest. I am the outgoing board chair for the Burien Economic Development Partnership. I'm here tonight to present our annual report to you. First, I'd like to thank our city council members for taking the time over the past few months to meet with our board members. Our desire is to improve communication about business issues in Burien, so as a partnership, we can be active voices for the local business community. As the economic climate has changed over the past few years, the business owners and operators in the community are looking for hope and prosperity in the Burien market, and that help in the form of cooperative and effective city government is available. The partnership will be seeing some transitions this upcoming year, with several of our long-serving members exiting due to term limits, and we have some new board members we look forward to seeing as you finish your interviews and appointments. Brian Suter will be transitioning to from vice chair to chair. I'm so excited for him. And Rick O will be serving as vice chair. I won't match his last name. Susan Gree will be serving as our secretary this upcoming year. The partnership has gone through several focused exercises to uncover potential opportunities that would benefit the city and encourage economic growth. Concepts explored so far have included assisting with the development of the Economic Development Strategic Plan and Action Plan process, exploring experiential retail opportunities, and looking at workforce development and education resources as an opportunity to recruit complementary businesses to Burien. These ideas and concepts are still in the vetting stages, and we'll have further development prior to presentation to the city staff and city council. The Economic Development Manager, Dan Trimble, has been very supportive in providing the BDP with support and guidance as it relates to the 2013 work plan development. And the partnership looks forward to working with the city council, city staff, and the business community in making Burien a better place. If you have any comments or questions I can take back to the partnership, I'd be happy to do so at this time.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your service to our city. Look forward to working with you. Now we'll move on to the next business agenda item, which is a discussion of modification to the Burien CARES Fund.
Good evening, Mayor Bennett, council member. My name is Nhân Nguyen, your management analyst from the City Manager Department. The purpose of this agenda bill on council package page 97 is for council to discuss modification to the Burien CARES contract. I would like to provide you some background information for this agenda bill. In June 2011, the City of Burien and CARES signed the contract for animal control services for the period of June 15, 2011 through May 30, 2014. At the council meeting on November 5th last year, council directed staff to hire Ms. Denise McVicker from the Humane Society for Tacoma and Pierce County to conduct operation review of CARES. Ms. McVicker conducted a 2-day operation review in February. At the March 25th council study session meeting, staff presented the following highlight from the McVicker report. Highlight number 1, CARES is fulfilling its contractual duties with the City of Burien. Highlight number 2, CARES is treating animals humanely. Highlight number 3, there are various improvements that CARES should be making to its operation. Staff has 2 additional observations. Number 1, CARES is providing an extremely high level of service at an unrealistically low cost. Staff believes that this level of service is not sustainable with this level of funding coming into the future. Number 2, the improvements in the McVicker report should be implemented. However, in many cases, they provide a higher level of service outside the scope of the existing contract. Following up on council request at the March 25th meeting, staff talked with Mr. Sean Buffo, Finance Administrator for the King County's Record and Licensing Services Division. Last Friday, staff received a new cost estimate from King County. It was too late to include in the council package, but you should have a PowerPoint presentation in front of you. The last page kind of summarizes the new cost estimate, in which staff will present to you, will present a PowerPoint to you shortly. King County estimate that they would charge us $418,000 per year, less the licensing revenue, and I will go into the detail of this in the PowerPoint presentation. Before I go into the PowerPoint presentation, I would like to acknowledge the attendance of Mr. Sean Buffo and Mr. Jim Mueller, Director of the Regional Animal Services at King County, at tonight's meeting. They're over there. Mr. Buffo and Mr. Mueller were kind enough to accept our invitation to come and to answer any question council may have tonight. This is the PowerPoint presentation that you have in your council package, starting on page 117. The number, the one in the package missed the last final 2 slides, but staff make copies for you, and you see them here on the overhead. This PowerPoint presentation is similar to the one that staff made at the study session last month with a few updates. Staff would like to summarize that for you. The operation review of CARES in February found that CARES meet its contractual obligation with the City of Burien, treat the animal humanely, and they need to make improvement. Some of these improvements are easy fixes, and they are currently being implemented by CARES, such as wearing goggles when handling cleaning chemicals, removing cats only when necessary when cleaning cages, and answer the phone properly. Some of the recommendation would take additional resource and time. Ms. Denise McVicker recommends that the City of Burien should contract with CARES to pick up dead animals on the road and in public spaces. She recommends that there should be another trained person to back up Mr. Ray Helms, the only animal control officer there. She recommends the purchase of commercial sanitizer, dishwasher, uniforms, and badges. She recommended live animals to be vaccinated right away upon intake. And she recommends hiring a consultant, whoever that person may be in the future, just to train staff in an assortment of things. This is, staff would like to direct council attention to this slide. This slide shows the cost of service that we are paying CARES, and the newest cost estimate that King County would charge Burien to provide animal services. This also showed the level of service in 2012 that CARES and King County are providing to their respective jurisdiction. In terms of cost, we are paying CARES $120,000 a year, and we keep the licensing revenue. The net cost to the city of Burien is $50,000 per year. King County estimated that they would charge us $418,000 a year minus the licensing revenue. It would cost Burien roughly about $332,000 a year. Staff would like to point out that this new cost estimate is lower than the one given to us last year by King County. However, staff would like to note that the licensing revenues estimated by King County is $86,000, which is different than $70,000 that we are currently collecting. The reason for that is that King County would require Burien to adopt the King County code for pet license fee, which is $10 higher than in Burien's, and they would require us to eliminate lifetime licenses for senior and disabled pet owners. Currently, these folks are paying $15 fee for the lifetime of the pet, which under the King County system they would have to renew yearly. Moving away from the cost a little bit, staff would like to direct council's attention to the level of service. These are the same data that staff presented to council last month. Just want to summarize this for you. In 2012, CARES took on about half the number of calls that King County was taking. The adoption rate was similar. CARES had a better percentage in terms of animals returned to owners and of animals being euthanized. So to tie all of this back to the purpose of the agenda bill before council tonight, based on the cost estimate given to us by King County, based on the improvement recommendation given to CARES by Ms. Denise McVicker, based on the good services provided by CARES, which could be much better with additional funding, based on the staff observation that this current funding model for CARES is unrealistic and not sustainable, staff would like to recommend to council the following. The first recommendation is to extend the contract from May 30th, 2014 to May 30th, 2016. Extending the contract provides some level of certainty and stability for the organization. We would recommend to increase this total contract cost from $120,000 per year annually to $170,000 annually. Allow part of this payment to be paid upfront in a lump sum to help them with some immediate capital need to make immediate improvement to their facility, and increase this amount annually by COLA equal to that given to city staff, and the increase shall not exceed a maximum of 3%. And the last recommendation is to modify the scope of work to remedy ongoing operational issue identified in the McVicker report. This concludes the agenda bill presentation. Staff is ready to take on council comments and directions.
And council, as Jan noted, we have the director of the county regional animal control services, Jean Mueller, here with us this evening, and the finance administrator, Sean Defoe, who are both available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And so we'll just start off and see who we want to direct questions to as we go through. First up, we have Deputy Mayor Kukoya.
Thank you, and thank you, King County, for coming. I would like to eventually hear from you, but would like to start our discussion as a council. There's a couple of concerns that I have. I'm just going to start here and probably add through our discussion. Rather than extend the contract, we just did that with waste management. We put it back out to bid, so I would support that rather than extend the contract. I'd like to know from staff what our history is of providing capital funds for nonprofit organizations. And the service calls on the overhead are very surprising. We saw this last time. And so I wondered if we could get a description on what these service calls consist of and why there's such a discrepancy from what we've had historically in the past. I've seen some numbers for 2008 and 2009 which show approximately 500 service calls a year. And why did it jump 5 times the amount? And then I think that's where I'm going to leave off for now and let other folks ask questions. Thank you.
To the question of capital for nonprofits, I'm sure council is aware that we do business with an awful lot of nonprofits. Typically, we pay them for their services and they can use that for capital if they wish. So I can't sit here and tell you exactly what we have directly funded in any nonprofit, only to say that we give them money and they use that money to provide the capital that they need. In this case, the reason we thought this was a good idea because we're talking about things like sterilizers, badges, uniforms, that sort of thing. And we thought that rather than wait until money had accumulated over a period of some number of months, that the greatest benefit to the community would be to fund those upfront, and so we could have the longest term benefit from their use. As to the service calls, I can let, I think we have someone from CARES here who can tell you about that herself. Deborah? I've asked that question myself, and Deborah can repeat what she told me.
So service calls are documented every time the phone rings. They document it into a log, sits by the phone. They don't document necessarily calls like where you're located, what are your hours, but we document any kind of questions, any animal complaint, animal-related incidents. Then at that point, they determine whether to make a case file and dispatch an officer or what have you. We also don't document our return calls. So the number you get there is a true understanding of calls minus all the little tedious calls that we get, you know, like what your hours are and things like that.
One of the, we met, Jan and I met with Gene and Sean on Friday. We were talking about the presentation tonight and making sure that our information is accurate. And we touched on this issue of calls and of other data. And we were interested in the idea of having a uniform data collecting model throughout the county, not just for Burien and for King County, but for other cities as well, with criteria that might ensure that these are apples to apples. To the best of our knowledge, these are apples to apples. But I was intrigued and I like the idea of kind of a data sharing model that might make sure that occur across all different sorts of services.
Councilman Ronson.
Okay, I had a couple questions on the information and then a couple comments to make. Down here on page 5 of the one that's up there, we've got 3 animal control officers. Is that 3 officers on the street at any one time, or is that 3 officers?
Would you like King County to come up?
Sure.
Would you mind?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Dr. Gene Mueller. I'm one of the 3 veterinarians that currently work for Regional Animal Services, and happy to try and answer your question. The listed 3 animal control officers are the number of officers at a minimum that are on the street 7 days a week.
Okay, so any given time there's the 3 on the street.
That's correct, and typically, particularly Monday through Friday, there's generally 4, and there's usually 2 in District 500, which would include this South County area. There's also the animal control sergeants that are also available for supporting those investigations, enforcement, public emergencies.
Okay, the animal control sergeant would be somebody that stays back at their office most of the time, and then...
Or they'll be doing investigations of vicious animals under Title 11, or investigations for cruelty under RCW. They do more specialized work, as well as providing backup when there's individuals who are on vacation or sick, or a million other reasons families don't let you go to work.
Okay, the description of the service area here, I see several cities named, plus Vashon Island and White Center.
District 500, one of the 3 districts that we're currently using under this ILA model.
Okay, so this the ones that are named here is the District 500?
I believe that is a representation of District 500, yes. We can absolutely give you a map of all of those
Okay, so
districts
that-
and confirm
That has 2 officers at a time in it, or 3?
2 in District 500.
Now, I did not see the West Hill area, Skyway listed. Is it?
Unincorporated King County.
Yeah, is that part of District 5?
Yes.
Now, how about the unincorporated area in southeast King County, out around Black Diamond and Enumclaw in that area?
That would be part of 500 as well.
Okay.
And that's why there's the requirement or the desirability of having 2 officers available for east and west of 167.
Now, a number of people raised questions about the reporting of the number of service calls, and somebody mentioned 600 service calls in Kent, so that's less than 2 a day. So what, do you guys count service calls differently somehow?
I can tell you how we count them, and then you can deduce yourself. We take service calls into our call center, and they're entered as calls for service or call for information. We typically are counting calls for service, and we roughly have a little over 5,000 or so a year, and that's for all of the 1,100 square miles that we service. If we have additional calls or follow-up to that original call, it's actually a sequence. It is not a new call. So if I have 10 people calling about the same dog in the middle of the street, it's 1 call, 1 service call. And that might be, I wonder, and then the other question I had for Deborah and her examination of it is, perhaps the equivalent number to the 5,300 we have is the number of investigations or service that it sends out. I don't know if that's a number that's readily accessible, but as an epidemiologist, that would be the number that I would want to look at to try and make that comparison.
Yeah, well, I was, even with that, I was thinking 15 a day for basically all South King County, but it doesn't seem like a lot.
Well, it depends on the kind of call it is, I would imagine.
Okay. Well, the other questions I had were for Deborah, I guess.
Actually, do you mind then, Councilmember Robinson, since we've got Dr. Mueller here, if we could maybe focus, use his time wisely. All questions we have for him, hopefully we can address, and then we can move on. Thank you very much for allowing us to do that. So any further questions for Dr. Mueller? Councilmember Gilman.
1,100 square miles is a large geographic area to cover.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the average time from the intake call to an animal control officer being at the origin of the call?
It's going to depend on where in the county it is. Fortunately, here in South King County, we're very close to the Kent shelter, and District 500 is fairly readily addressed. If you're in North Bend or you're afar in Enumclaw, it depends on where the call would, where the officer is when they get the call. The goal is to get to priority 1 or priority 2 calls. Those are threats to life and safety within 2 hours.
Okay. So you prioritize, like our police department does, immediate threat.
Potential threat,
Yeah.
nuisance, information.
So if an officer has to travel to Maple Valley or to Black Diamond or to Vashon Island, that probably takes that officer away from responding to other calls, leaving you 1 or 2 officers to cover the entire territory. So I imagine there are some logistics that need to be set up on these priorities and the distance that these officers are having to travel to meet the call.
Well, that's to say it lightly, that we triage the calls. So you can certainly imagine a situation where we have a vicious dog that's on Vashon Island that we need to respond to. We may make the decision to send one of the 500 ACOs to go do it, and then have the sergeant come into the 500 district and do the regular calls, or vice versa. the sergeant who's still available by radio may actually make the trip to Vashon.
Okay,
So there are absolutely those decisions that are made. And even beyond that, speaking to the depth of bench, you could also have a situation where you need 2 officers, they need to go to Vashon, and we'll pull, just like ball players do, we'll actually pull people from the north to make coverage so that we have somebody available for emergency calls. Absolutely, it's something we do every single day. I used to have hair.
Can you give me a sense of how many of these 5,000 calls are high priority? Is it
20%.
20%. So that means your officers are busy a good share of the time.
They're flying, you bet.
Yeah. I just look at the difference in areas of service, and yes, we only have 1 officer who's available by radio, but we have 7 square miles of city of Burien, so there's a lot less territory to have to cover with that 1 officer. I think we do need clarity on the guidelines for a service call and what gets recorded. And I don't know if CARES is set up to do a true compilation of data in a way that would make it meaningful to the city council. Service calls of 2,800, that's a pretty high number, but what are they doing in order to document those service calls? If someone, like Deborah was saying, if someone calls and says, I saw a dog, does that mean an officer will go out? So when your list of service calls, does that mean an officer gets in a vehicle and leaves the center for each one of those 5,000 calls?
They're dispatch, absolutely.
So it's a dispatch number.
It would actually be the number that is entered into the Chameleon record system for follow-up by the district officers. And it's by priority, so the dog who is seen astray, or my dog, or my neighbor's dog is defecating on my lawn, those are a much lower priority. And as the call priorities allow, the officers will deal with high priority calls and then go do the cleanup, so to speak, on the lower priority calls. So they actually do that triage themselves through the Chameleon system, so they can see throughout the day. So if I'm an animal control officer, use your imagination, they'll actually have in their truck a computer that is hooked onto the county's network, just like the sheriffs do. And as calls come in, they're actually entered into the Chameleon system, and they appear for dispatch by the animal control officer to see that there's a call in, White Center, Burien, Auburn, all the places that have left. And we actually can then take those calls by priority, and they're actually prioritized in the system, and say that that's one that has to be done. And the animal control sergeants, as well as the operations manager for field service, can also see that there are priority calls that need follow-up, and can make phone calls, can make decisions about pulling someone from another district to deal with those priority calls.
2 more questions. One, is a barking dog a reason to dispatch an officer?
Typically, barking dogs would be responded to with a letter, a bark letter, which essentially is asking for information about when the barking is happening, as well as are there other complainants involved.
And
Because those are typically neighbor disputes.
Exactly.
Not that there's not barking going on, but it's typically the tip of the iceberg as far as interpersonal relationships.
Been there, done that. I know exactly what you're talking about. The one that was tied outside my bedroom window to their back porch. Took me months. In response to the woman's question during public comment, complaining about unleashed dogs in her neighborhood, do you respond to those complaints, or is that something that would take an officer call to resolve, or is it just the neighborhood needs to get together and figure out a plan for the dogs that are running loose?
We typically will respond to dogs at large, particularly if there is a known owner of the animal, because we're actually concerned that that dog can A, get injured, or B, actually be a danger to someone in the community. So it is a lower priority call than, say, a bite response or a dog that's injured in the street, things like that. But that is one of those calls that we would respond to.
Okay. I like the idea of prioritizing. That seems to really speak to how the officer is using his or her day to respond to calls. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I just want, one last comment is, animal control is often perceived as an animal issue. It's not an animal issue at all. It's a people issue. It's about public safety, and then it is about how do you handle humanely the animals that are in your care. So we in King County know that you are all interested in what's best for your communities, and you'll make those decisions. What we want to offer is we're here to help regardless of your decision. We love to be a contract city relationship with you. We'd also love to continue to build a positive relationship with whoever does your animal care, to raise their professionalism, to raise our professionalism, to help animals both in King County and in Burien. And I wish you the best in the future.
Good.
I have one more
I might
follow-up.
still have a few more questions for you, Dr.
One more comment. Your service is priced competitively for the area that you cover. When we looked at the contract and made the decision as a council, we looked at this as discretionary money. There's nothing in state law that requires that we perform animal services. So when we looked at the difference in cost to our budget, that's when we made the decision that we would try to do it ourselves. And I think it's been a bit of a startup, but I'm very happy with what CARES is doing. I think they're doing a great job for our community. But there are those handful of people that really, really want King County, and cost is not an issue. So we appreciate everything you're doing for the general region, but when we look at what we can afford in our budget, we're really evaluating the level of service.
Thank you very much.
Couple more questions, probably. Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you, Councilmember McGilton, for asking for clarity on service calls, making sure we're comparing apples to apples. One other question that I have is, can you give us an idea of the professional staff that King County has to support the officers that are out doing their job? So you're a veterinarian, you're on staff. What other kind of professionals are there that support the animal control service?
Well, there's essentially 4 businesses that comprise Regional Animal Services. We have the licensing section, which is a section of 4 that do all of the animal and pet licensing. We have the veterinary clinic, which has 2 licensed veterinarians and 3 licensed veterinary technicians that do all the intake exams as well as a spay-neuter for the 5,000 plus animals that we take in a given year, triaging them, sending them to emergency care, interacting with the hundreds of foster families. So that's what they're doing. And then we have an operations manager for the field service side who is dealing with the 2 animal control sergeants and 6 animal control officers that comprise the team that then is distributed over the course of 7 days a week. As well, we have an operations manager who runs the shelter itself and works with 2 sergeants for the shelter side, and then probably something on the order of 12 ACOs or ACTs who are dealing with the animal care for the animals that we have in population.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Dr. O'Neill? Dr. O'Brien?
This might be what it might be transition. I have some historical data from King County on calls for 2008 and 2009. And just doing a comparison between Burien and SeaTac, which is our neighbor for those 2 years, the 2-year total for Burien, there was 977 calls. And then for CTAC, there were 953 calls. So just based on those rough statistics, it seems like CTAC and Burien were about equal service needs. And I know CTAC has recently got a contract. I guess my question is, what criteria are used to determine the cost of the contract?
I actually have someone here who can begin to answer that question. That's Sean Buffo, who's our finance manager.
And you'll be sorry that you asked.
High level, Sean.
High level. Keep reminding me. The contract is, costs are allocated on a usage, mostly on a usage basis. So 80% is allocated based on usage and 20% based on population. So, if you are a city with high use, you will pay more than less use, you will pay less.
And so that begs the question, how do you define usage?
Usage is based on the 3 different services. In this case, the clinic and the shelter are together. Sheltering, field services, and pet licensing. And each one of those 3 services are allocated based on the usage that relates to them. So sheltering is allocated based, the usage is essentially intakes, animal intakes for each jurisdiction. Field services are based on the number of calls, and licensing is based on the number of pet licenses sold in a year.
So the unanswered question I have, and maybe it comes later, is I'm curious to the contract that is currently in place with CTAC and how that was figured, and if there's some comparable usage rates that we have that might help us understand that.
I would probably have to go back and look specifically at the city of CTAC and see where the usage compares. Off the top of my head, I think the city of SeaTac has quite a bit less in terms of the estimated intakes for animals. The shelter part of the program is, I think, about 50 or 60% of the overall cost of participating in RASC. And so with a lower intake, they're going to have a fairly significant difference in overall cost.
And so is the intake determined by the number of service calls?
Intakes is the number of animals brought in from that jurisdiction.
Okay, which is dependent on service calls, because if you have follow-on service calls, is this counted against that one animal? It's not counted, if I understand that correctly.
Intakes are calls for service, which Dr. Miller described as they're prioritized. But there are specific calls for service in the field. Whether or not those calls result in an intake depends on the situation.
So you could have a case where you have a field service call and it's gone out to, and the city is charged for that, and then because the animal has been impounded by the animal control officer, it may then be brought into the shelter and be an intake as well. So it can be, it'll show up as activity in both of those particular buckets, if you will, of activity.
I think it was brought up already from up here, but it'd be nice to make sure we understand the comparison of apples to apples on the definition of service calls and intake and perhaps priorities. Thank you.
One follow-up question while you're there. So can you just confirm the numbers for the RASC here, that we have the net cost of Burien and the cost behind you there, the 418 and 332? Are those accurate figures from your perspective?
Yes, those are the numbers that I put together and updated last week.
Okay.
At the request of Burien staff.
Okay. So thank you again very much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your perspective and your candor, and it's incredibly valuable for us, for you guys to give this information to us, so we really appreciate it. With that, we'll move on to further discussion and questions for staff, and if we ever can just sign up again, and I'll take it in order. First up, we have Councilmember Block.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have some serious questions about the service call issue, and I think that, again, we're looking at an apples to oranges comparison, so I just cannot fathom how we can go from 500 service calls a year to 2,800, unless the definition of what a service call is vastly different, so I want to see some more clarification on that. The other issue I have is proposal by staff, and it's pretty vague. And I want to see some specifics, why we need to spend an extra $50,000 a year, what specifically we'd be spending it on. And I also have concerns about extending the contract. I feel that having a competitive environment can benefit the citizens and the city as far as performance. So I do have some concerns about that. Also, I'm going to bring this issue up again. Right now, when you look at page 5, I think that's up there, we see that we're running a $50,000 a year deficit versus license revenue. With staff's proposal, we'd be looking at a $100,000 a year deficit. Quite frankly, I feel that if we're going to be spending the money, we should be spending it on our two-legged citizens. I have concerns about outreach as far as licensed sales. Right now, if you go to White Center, Normandy Park, or across the street from City Hall, or City Hall itself, those are the only outlets available for purchasing a pet license. Quite frankly, I don't think we've done enough outreach as far as licensed sales. We shouldn't be running this deficit. I think that before we look at any more funding for animal control, we need to get our house in order as far as license sales and revenue. I don't think that this is a service that the citizens expect to be subsidized. I think that they expect it to be self-supporting. So I'd like to see us get on the path for that. And anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember McGill.
We've had this discussion for more than a year. The folks who have been commenting very consistently to City Council through emails, to the B-Town blog. The comments appear to say the city is hiding information, that we aren't being responsible for overseeing this contract, and that generally the whole idea of this is to support a group who are doing it just because they like the city. I object to all of those comments. I think they're simple and directed at CARES in a way that they're trying to reflect that the city isn't being fiscally responsible. One option we all have as council and as a city is to not fund this program at all. To say, no, we don't want to put any money into animal control. We'll just let the community and the neighborhoods figure out what to do with stray dogs. The CARES facility is contracted to deal with dogs. They're not contracted to deal with cats. They've taken on that responsibility on their own, and generally I think they're doing a very responsible job. Yes, this is a startup organization. I think Deborah and Ray have done an amazing job of pulling all the pieces together, and I truly resent the negative comments that appear on a regular basis just so we can spend $332 $50,000 out of the city budget, discretionary money, to fund a King County program. Generally, there are economies of scale where a regional program is more cost effective. In this case, I don't see any reason why it should be. So I truly support what CARES are doing. I think they need to clean up their act a little bit, get more involved in data collection and data management so the numbers are put forward in a way that the general public can understand. I would like to see them develop a scope of work and a budget, a line item budget, so we can see how the money is being spent and where it's going, and to ensure that the recommendations that have been brought forward by the consultant are truly implemented into the system. So I do support CARES. I think this is a good program. I don't mind that we're increasing it by $50,000. We're also keeping the license fees reasonable. I agree with Councilmember Block that the city could be more responsible in getting the information to the community. That's something that the city should take on and just do more with advertising our program and talking about the good results instead of the negative comments that I see on the B-Town blog. Thank you.
Councilmember Andrew.
Thank you. I would also like to express my concern about the contract extension. Typically, extensions are based on successful completion of a contract. We're only halfway through this contract period. The most recent audit shows that there are some deficiencies, so I believe at this time it's inappropriate to offer an extension of the contract.
Mr. Martin.
A couple of things. Jan, did you want to
Yes.
make a brief?
Yes. Mayor Bennett, council member, staff would like to respond to a few comments made tonight from the general public and from questions from council. The first comment is relating to service calls. So I just want to acknowledge that Mr. Sean before has been a fantastic person to work with. I told him that we've been asking way too much of him to crunch the data and to do the numbers and all that stuff, and he has hosted me, Deborah, and Mike, and done a whole lot of things for us. After the study session last month, while Sean is putting together the new cost estimate for us, I told him, I say, hey, listen, the service call that is provided to us by CARES, this is the number that has raised some concern. So he said that he pretty much had the same concern. And he suggests that why don't I run the new cost estimate based on the average number of your surrounding jurisdiction, and also based on the number that they had when they were providing animal services for us back in 2009. So the service call there, the 2,800, the number of around 2,860 is not a factor in their cost estimate. They actually use the comparable number from the jurisdiction. So I just want to point that out for you. The second comment is about the specific of the recommendation for the increase of the $50,000, which staff can bring back to council, but a various of things. A couple of things I want to say is that the recommendation by Ms. McVicker for CARES to pick up dead animal in public space, that is going to be included in the increase. Also, there's another recommendation that I think make a lot of sense, which is the vaccination of all live animal upon intake. I have talked to Deborah. Deborah said that if we have a room that we can do that, staff are trained in doing that. Instead of paying, let's say, $50, the cost is actually being reduced by half. So that is, in general, in the future, that's going to save them a whole bunch of money. So that is two the many recommendations that staff can come of the line item that staff can come back with. Another thing that could be included in this is that, let's say, CARE have more staff resource. I want to point out that currently we have about 1,200 licenses that are waiting to be renewed, not being renewed. We have about 1,400 licenses that not being transferred over to us from King County yet. So for a total of 2,600 licenses that income that we don't have. Part of the scope of work could be for CARES, the new addition, the new staff to do it, to work on this, and maybe we can come back with some kind of revenue sharing arrangement and whatnot. So that can bring up our revenue. And that's, I have some more comments, but I've said that.
You remember to keep reminding me. Yeah, a couple of things, and thank you, Don, for clarifying the service calls. So based on an average, and that should assuage some of the concern that some sort of inflated service call is inflating the cost. This is the cost. If it wasn't the cost, they would have told us that. They think this is reasonable and it's recent. So this is a fair representation of what the county would charge us at the end of the day. First point. Second point, this question of extending the contract, CARES has put forth a yeoman's effort and invested in a significant amount of capital already, including vehicles, including creating the space that's necessary. I don't think it would be unrealistic or unfair on CARES' part to look at some of the skepticism that it hears occasionally and think about whether it's wise to further invest capital to improve the organization, only to have it be out on its ear in a number of months. Therefore, I think that particularly extending it 2 years, I would suggest longer, but I think that's a bare minimum. I think would do a lot to give them the security needed to make the investments that will improve the services that they provide to the community. The second point, this whole notion of what are they doing or what would they do, the whole idea behind this particular agenda item was to come before council and explain conceptually where we were going. You'll note in the agenda bill, and I'm sure you've all read it, that our intent was to come back with the contract which would lay out specifically what it is they would be doing. This was not intended to go into those specifics. The notion of the notion of sustainability that Jack or Councilmember Blackaby has brought up is very worthy, and we would be delighted to be the first one on the West Coast to do that. We would be the first one on the West Coast. This is the model in our city comes the closest to being zero cost to the taxpayer as anyone that we're aware of by a long shot. Nevertheless, we do support the idea of reducing any impact on the general fund. To that end, as Jan had said, coming to you as a separate agenda item will be a proposal where we either contract with CARES or some affiliate or something along those lines for additional license fee revenue that would be collected through some of the areas we already know we can get that license fee and share that revenue with CARES to some extent, further stabilizing this organization and further moving us towards the notion of not having any cost to the general fund. So I think well, I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any further questions.
Councilmember Robson.
Yeah, when I started out before, I was going to ask a couple questions about how much money it would take to fill all of the items that were on the audit report. But I'm going to skip past that. One of the things we have to decide is, do we want animal control? What do we want it to look like? This council decided at some point before I joined it that it would contract out locally rather than continue to pay King County for it, and ended up with a $120,000 contract, which failed because the contractor wasn't able to make it on that contract amount. We've got CARES trying to fill in on that same contract amount. should be fairly obvious that that's not enough money for animal control, especially when you see King County saying it's gonna cost $300,000 more than that to provide a level of service. Frankly, unless we want to go back to that more expensive and in my experience, less effective service, we need to deal with CARES. There aren't any agencies out there clamoring for this business. I'm a little bit, it struck me a little bit that why CARES doesn't want to go and do a competitive process and get a chance to raise its bid up. Your only competitor is bidding $418,000. That seems like a pretty good chance to get your price up.
Should we stop while you're doing it? We're on one side of this, remember?
No, I'm saying putting another $50,000 in and extending the contract actually seems like a pretty good investment. My big fear, if this did go back out for bid, is it would end up costing us even more money, unless the council did what it did 4 years ago or whatever when they first did this experiment and we contract with somebody that can't fulfill the contract. We've got CARES in there, we know what it takes, we know what they'll deliver and what it will cost. And as far as trying to pay for it all with animal licensing, that's just not realistic at all. To cover King County's cost, we'd have to raise the license, we'd have to collect 6 times as much in license fees. If you doubled the number of people with licenses, you'd still be charging 3 times as much as we do now. And my experience is that if you start raising fees, your sales start going down. At some point, you're likely to end up with fewer licenses. You know, this is not a deficit, this is an expense of running the city, just like paving streets. Except this is a lot cheaper. I like the proposal, assuming that CARES is on board with that. The proposal to increase the funding, extend the contract enough to make it worthwhile to keep doing this for us. And then in 3 years, we can see if anybody else wants to try and get into the business and put it up for bids.
Okay, I think we've heard from everyone. We've got a couple of comments. I hope we'll be able to make it brief. I haven't commented yet, so I would like to make one point is that we heard when we were going to go into this audit that some critics claimed that it was going to be a whitewash, and so I want to acknowledge, I haven't heard anyone else acknowledge it, so I want to acknowledge staff's work on the audit, and that it was a legitimate audit, and it was important information that we got, and I think staff did an exemplary job in conducting that and making sure that we're improving it as much as we can. So I support increasing the contract. I think we're getting an incredible deal. If you look at the numbers, which King County confirmed, it was very valuable that they were here tonight to comment on that. With that, Councilmember Block.
Yeah, I am disappointed that some people have misunderstood what I was saying. We're running a $50,000 a year deficit on CARES right now. Has nothing to do with King County Animal Control. And you know, I'm very disappointed when people try to dismiss making at least the effort to cover our costs as too much, or nobody else does it. You know, this is Burien. I don't accept that answer. And when there's only 4 outlets to purchase a license and 2 of them happen to be outside of the city, you know, we're not making enough effort to at least cover our costs and make this program self-sustaining. You know, one thing that we may want to consider is letting CARES as an incentive keep all the revenue from pet license sales over our contract amount. You know, there's a fine incentive there for them to go out and push to sell licenses. And source of revenue that they need. Right now, I have a very real concern. We're voting for something without having line item justification of the costs, and I'm not comfortable doing that. It's not our money, and I am not comfortable voting for anything without a line item justification. So I want to see that within any proposal that's brought before council. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. Unfortunately, King County has left, but I would ask that we look at what kind of services King County can provide for the proposed $170,000 a year. So that's an ask that I'm going to put in.
Okay, so that's the end of our comments. Do you need any further direction from us at this time?
No.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Can we go ahead and move what we moved from the consent agenda, the city council meeting guidelines? So right now, my proposal is going to be very quick. If we could just move forward as quickly as possible. We have a staff presentation, or have we covered this sufficiently?
I can make it really quick. Pretty much what it is that at the last meeting, Council Member Edgar Moore requested staff to add Section 22 integration of new council members to the guidelines. So on page 81 of the council package, council can see that staff has done that. However, staff would like to make the following recommendation to this Section 22 on page 81. The first recommendation is to specify the date of the workshop to be the third Saturday of January, just for council and staff so we can plan ahead better. On section 22.2, to specify the date of the workshop to be the third Saturday of June so that we can also plan ahead. On section 22.3, regarding the whole council will conduct a formal review and discussion of the council meeting guidelines. Staff would like to suggest that we take out this section 22.3 because council can take up this action at any time. And what you have in front of you is the version that incorporate council member Edgar request without any of the staff recommendation. So with that staff, we'd like to take comment and direction.
Okay, so what I would simply like to propose is I applaud Councilmember Edgar for bringing this issue to us, but it was brought at the last minute. What I would like to have is an understanding from staff of whether there are any best practices among city councils or the AWC or anyone that we could, as far as integrating new council members in a cost-effective manner. This proposal is the only thing we've seen. We haven't been able to compare it to anything else, but there's substantial investments in both time and money to do this. And so I want to make sure that we're doing it cost-effectively and that we've got some background. So that is my proposal, is just to move forward with the council meeting guidelines without Councilmember Edgar's addition here, and that if we want to discuss this, we just add this to a future agenda and discuss it as a separate agenda item. Any further discussion on that? Deputy Mayor Kukoviac.
Well, I feel comfortable with the section 22 as it's written in our packet on page 81. And I'd like to hear from Councilmember Robinson and Edgar, as they're the newest members of the council, how they feel about the process that they experienced and how they feel about this recommended process. I think putting a date specific, in the last year we've had to adjust our dates quite a bit, so I think that staying with just indicating which month to have it in would give us more flexibility. So I prefer to stay with it as written. And 22.3, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman Member Edgar, but I think the intention of that was at the first month after the new council members are sworn in, that we as a whole review the and discuss the council meeting guidelines so that everybody understands those at the same time in the same room.
That's correct. The intent of that particular item was not to go through what we've been going to for the last few months. But for the current council with the new council members to sit down and actually walk through all the guidelines, operating guidelines, if there's any questions, everybody on the same page, get a chance to take advantage of more senior members and what they've done in the past so that it gets the new members up to speed a lot quicker. As far as cost is involved, I like to consider that the amount that we spent for a facilitator at the last meeting, or last retreat, a portion of her services were really not used. She spent the first half part of our retreat just listening to staff reports about what they did in the previous year and what they're going to do in the next year, and then just a few hours in the afternoon did we actually have a chance to tap into some of her expertise. So we were paying for her for the whole day in that instance, but really getting only about 3 hours of actual expertise use that we were paying for. So I'm not sure that there's that much of a cost impact. And I would agree also the reason for the month was to allow that flexibility rather than just trying to tie it to a particular Saturday.
Councilmember McGillen.
I agree with the mayor. I think this section, although thought out by Council Member Edgar, leaves us with time and energy to support our new council members that may not be very cost effective. AWC offers training, many workshops to new council members to talk with their peers and get an idea of what it truly means to be a council member. Based on the number of subjects that we go through in the course of a council member's time, I don't know that a one-day retreat would give a new council member enough viable information that they would be better decision makers. I think being on council is absolutely on-the-job training. The other point I'd like to make is some council members and some jurisdictions come with their own agenda that they were elected for. They're not going to give up that agenda in a facilitated workshop. They've come with a clear mission to change the way the city operates. So I just don't see this section as bringing any continuity or commonality to a more effective council. I think council members should look to the training opportunities that they can have, that the city pays for, and look for like members on the council that could serve as mentors, rather than sitting there for 3 facilitated full-day workshops. Is not an effective use of a council member's time, either a new one or one that's been on the dais for a few years. So I would like to see this section removed. At the next meeting, I'd like the policies and procedures to go on the consent agenda without this paragraph. We could have more discussion later on in the year, and by November, we'll know who the new council members are, and we can put a strategy together to bring them on board. Thank you.
Councilmember Rossi.
Okay, now, first I have a question. Can we come back and amend these guidelines anytime we want?
Yes.
Okay. So I kind of fall in the middle between what I've heard in here. I like the idea of some kind of setting that helps integrate new members onto council. I don't necessarily see the need for a professionally facilitated full-day workshop, but I think something where we came together as a council, more or less in private, to talk about what is involved with a new council member, what they need to know, and help develop relationships between council members would be a good idea. Sections .3 and .4, I think, are really kind of unnecessary. 3, we can do anytime we want, and 4 is but I don't think we need that in the guidelines. But I would like to see something that does provide for some kind of more formal system for integrating new members into the council. I favor the idea of taking this out of here for now, putting it on the consent agenda without this, and then we can come back, maybe work off stage on some honing this a little bit, and then bring it back for more discussion later.
Councilmember Eckert. Thank you. I agree that there are opportunities for training for new council members, and I took advantage of that, and I hope other council members get in there first year. But there's a difference between going to a training session and to work on inclusion with an existing body that needs to work for a period of time. And I believe it's that that ability to create an inclusive atmosphere and getting people up to speed quick enough so that we're not going through this storming every 2 years as the new council members get on, that we never get a chance to become as functional as I think we should. And part of that is not necessarily training on decision making, it's working together and inclusively and collaboratively working as a council. So by pulling this out and saying we're going to deal with this sometime in the future just pushes it off to the future. Councilmember Block.
I understand and appreciate Councilmember Edgar's reason for putting this on here, but I, like Councilmember Jordan, have some concerns about how effective this will be. You know, we do have professional training opportunities through various organizations, not just AWC, that we can take advantage of. And I've done that, and I encourage every member of this body to do that, also through the National League of Cities. When I came on the council, I found that what helped me was just getting on the phone and talking to the people that were on the council already, or talking to other elected officials. And well, there were a couple of people that were on the council who reached out to me, and I appreciate that. And you know, I think that's something that we need to do for our new members if we want to integrate them and help them understand what their job is. I think it's our job to make sure that we give them the knowledge they need to be able to do the job to the best of our ability. So in that regard, I think that this proposal, while again I understand the desire, I think there's a better way to do it.
Okay, so do you need any further direction? Do we need a motion for this, or do you have the direction you need?
If the direction is to bring this back at the next council meeting, place it on the consent agenda minus section 13 additions that Councilmember Edgar suggested.
Section 22.
Section 22, thank you.
Yes, I think that's our consensus, so.
So we'll bring it back, put it on consensus, and council.
So we have I guess we have a dispute here on whether we have a consensus. So my understanding, just my notes. Yes, so Councilmember Robinson, Councilmember Gilpin, myself, and Councilmember Block favor taking section 22 out and placing this on the consent agenda for the next meeting.
Okay, so we can.
And so I'm seeing head nods for that, so. Okay, so let's move forward with that. Let's move forward with the next agenda item, which is a review of council proposed agenda schedule. So any proposed agenda items? Seeing no one, okay, Councilmember Block.
I'd like to ask that we have a presentation and discussion on refinancing the citywide First Avenue money running debt. Just like any homeowner that refinances their mortgage with interest rates as low as they are. I think that we have a duty to explore this And the potential, as I say, the taxpayers over $300,000 a year and pay the staff early, so I'd like to see that included on our future agenda schedule.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. I see on our proposed agenda schedule that we have the presentation of the quarterly financial report. Do we have a date certain on that?
May 6th.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple items. One is, I raised this at the retreat, the discussion of the cops part of the Kids and Cops and what we can do to potentially, what our options are to increase police presence or address safety concerns. I've been hearing recently a lot of concerns about that, so I would like us to consider adding that to the agenda. And then the other item I would like to consider adding is chickens. I've heard from some people that they have concerns that we allow less chickens than our neighboring cities. And I've heard there's some kind of a either petition or notice at the feed store on 52nd stating that also they would like to increase the number of chickens. So I'd like to add that at some point to the agenda.
I have a question. Are we talking hens or roosters?
I'm referring to hens. I personally don't want roosters, but
I draw the line at roosters, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my understanding is it's 3 chickens, certainly. That's
3 chickens. You don't include roosters as chickens.
You have 3 ducks, or 3 turkeys, or 3
Poultry.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, that's helpful to know. So, anyway, I would like to discuss, what are,
Seattle has 10.
okay, I heard 8. So, yeah, I'd like to get an understanding of our neighboring cities and what
And
we can.
Seattle has miniature goats that you can have too, and miniature pigs. So I think it would behoove us to look at Seattle's and update ours with what fits Burien, but taking a look at Burien, because they have upgraded theirs for sustainability factors.
Yeah, I think that, I agree, and that'd be wonderful. So, Deputy Mayor, go ahead, did you have anything else?
Yes, along with revising our animal husbandry ordinances, we were also going to look at our signage ordinances.
Yes.
When is that coming up?
Sometime this fall after this, I think.
Okay, thank you. And then the safety, I do support Mayor Bennett's request for more information on how we can make our city safer. Can we also have an idea of what's involved with our work program with that? If we put that on the agenda?
Sure, we could bring the work program that's been updated last quarter.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got 4 requests. If we could just get consensus on whether to add them. First is Councilmember Block's request to refinance the city like debt. I'm happy to consider that. Yeah, I see consent to do that.
I have a question. How much staff time would it take to do that?
I'll have to check. We brought a city manager report on this subject, and I'm thinking of a strategy where we just get Seattle to come down and talk to us, and that would be the easiest. And that way they can be directly available to the questions that we may not be able to anticipate.
If it doesn't involve a lot of staff time.
Well, I don't see where it involves a lot of staff time. It's basically like any other bond issue we've ever made. We are a bond broker and put our bid up, so.
Okay, so I think we've got consensus to add that. The police discussion, do we have consensus to have that? I see consensus to do that.
I'd like to have some sort of presentation on funding options too.
Yes, no, I agree. I would definitely like to see that be part of it, what our options are and where, how we pay for it.
So are you talking about new revenue? What are we talking about here? Just any, like how we would fund some number?
Well, first of all, we'd have to set a goal of how many officers we want, then we'd have to figure out what that would cost, and then where, if we have enough revenue to pay for it, or if not, do we want to look at other revenue sources? So, there's a lot involved with it, so I just want to have that.
Yeah, there is a lot involved, and if we're going to talk about new police officers, if we're not going to exacerbate the structural deficit, then it would be wise for me to come to council with some proposals around additional revenues and taxes and fees.
Well, I have no problem with that. Like I said,
I was just asking for clarification.
Yeah, we need to look at what options are available to us.
Okay, and then the chickens / other animals, we have consensus to discuss that.
I'm just glad somebody else besides me is bringing up the issue of chickens, Brian.
Happy to fall on my sword for that one. And then, okay, so those were the requests that I recall. So we've got, no future on chickens, by the way, but just hope you get it at some point. With that, we'll move on to the last business agenda item, which is the city manager's report.
Yeah, and here's what I'm going to suggest on that, the hour's late. The one item I wanted, the two items I wanted to talk about were items E on page 127 and F on the next page 128. These had to do with the kind of repeated assertions from Mr. West that we take great exception to, and which are detailed in your in the city manager's report. They're so outrageous as to deserve a verbal report, and we're prepared to do that, but we'd like to be able to do it when we have a little more time in council. It seems like now's not the appropriate moment. But in short, many of the things that Mr. West asserts here were things that he in fact had urged the city to do, and that he extrapolated in some unfathomable fashion mathematically to come to the conclusions he did, and they're just not supported by any logic that we understand. So I do think, though, that this merits a more focused council time, and we're happy to do that at the next meeting. Whichever you'd like. Sure, that'd be just fine. It shouldn't take too long, it's pretty basic stuff.
Councilmember Block.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's two requests I'd like to make to the city manager. First, when we receive our quarterly financial report in May, as part of that, I'd like to see a comparison, the revenue comparison between the actuals and what was projected, and also 2011 and 2012. I think that it's good to have that comparison and know where our revenue is in relation to what was projected. The other thing is the gal who keeps bringing up the issue of graffiti, and I have a concern. First of all, when a person is gotten to a point where they feel the only way they can get their issue addressed is to have to come before the council, that for obvious reasons has me concerned. And also, I have concerns about whether or not in the northeast area of the city, if we're applying our anti-graffiti ordinance in the same way that we apply it in the rest of the city. So, again, I'm bringing this up just because I'm concerned about the repetition of this, and also the fact that she's had to come before council several times. So I'd like to request that this be looked at, and whether or not we're dealing with this in the best way possible.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Block, for asking about the graffiti. I too have questions about the graffiti of the North Burien and why this person hasn't had a response in 26 days. So looking forward to that information.
Yeah, and just for the record, I'd be surprised if she hasn't had a response in 26 days, and I'll sit down and talk to Public Works. I know we get a number of calls, emails, that sort of thing. So we'll determine exactly
I
what's
actually
going on.
went out
to
see this, and the date on this email, and when I went out to see it, it's much longer than what our city is requiring.
We'll find out and get back to you, but seriously, there hasn't been a response in 26 days.
Then I wanted to thank you for the draft ILA that I asked for in our packet. And are we going to have a discussion on that soon? I have some questions on equity.
Yeah, we're not. We're not very close to that. I included this in the packet. Normally I wouldn't. I did that at your request. I told you that it was in a very, very draft form. There are 3 other cities that have not even turned in their drafts. We were the first, and I would anticipate that to be a number of months. So when the other cities have completed theirs along with the school district, at that point we'll sit down together and we'll bring it to you for your consideration.
Thank you.
In reference to Councilmember Block's request for financial information, what we've done in the past is when we want detailed reports, we've come to you and asked if we could go to the relevant department head to get that kind of clarification. I don't know that all of us on council want the level of detail that Councilmember Black is asking for. And to take up a section of our very busy council meetings to go over this kind of detail is not something that.
So, if I can interrupt, here's what I think this is gonna work, or the way it's gonna work. So, we will bring you a report on May 6th. Councilmember Ed Kerr has met with the finance director on several occasions to talk about how this is gonna look, or how it might look, and given his input. So we have a pretty good idea about how this is gonna go together. We're gonna bring it to you, and because that's our first one, we're gonna ask you how you like it. And then, at that point, we'll have direction from council where we go back and modify and catch all the things that council would like to have included in that. I'm gonna make a pitch that any information that we have, that the information that you're most interested in is something that we can automate so we can just crank this stuff out and minimize future staff work. It shouldn't be too hard to get year-end actuals for revenue and that sort of thing. But what I would ask the council's indulgence to do is let us show it to you and then tell us what you don't like about it, and then we'll go back and we'll do an iterative process and we'll get something that you feel comfortable with.
And any individual council member can meet with our finance director.
Of course.
To get the more detailed information that not all council feels is necessary.
Yeah, of course, we would encourage that, actually.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
Yeah, just on that same subject, what I expect to see is something that compares actual budget on major items, and it'd be nice if we could have it available online where anybody in the city could look it up and then maybe get an explorer that have more information. I don't know what it takes to produce
So
that.
we'll bring it to you May 6th, and you can tell us what additional information you'd like.
Okay, with that, council reports. Seeing none, can we get a motion to adjourn? All those in favor?
Aye.